Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 6 Plus Plus State of the Singles Meta Report for February 2026. I'm Tom, your host, lowest of men, and I'm here to give you a deep dive into what's happening in the singles game, which armies are thriving, which ones are struggling, all the ups and downs, and the current state of our beloved game of competitive 40k. You're all amazing. Thanks for supporting us. Do hit like, subscribe, do leave a comment. If you want to see more of this in the future, do let me know. Okay, let's get straight to business. Here's how I like to do my meta breakdowns. I'm going to reflect on meta status at the start. Then I'm going to move to consider some outliers in terms of factions that are particularly dominant and think about why that is. I'm going to look at some outliers who are struggling and consider some potential reasons for that as well. We're going to consider some wider sort of rising stars and falling stars, armies that are having good or bad moments for different reasons. And I'm going to reflect as well towards the end on the prevailing meta archetype in the game right now and what that tells us. Hopefully this will give you a bunch of ways for analysing and assessing the meta for yourself in the future. And I do, of course, draw a combination of stats from around the 40k world, my competitive innovations work, writing up all the armies that are performing and placing at events, and, of course, the very many anecdotal experiences I have testing, playing, and performing with 6 and Team England behind the scenes as well. So let's get to that meta status. It's a broken meta, guys, unfortunately. Not broken beyond repair. But we are dealing with a meta which is on results and outcomes in terms of wins and singles GT wins in particular. We are looking at a broken army and a couple of others that are exceptionally strong and potentially only just about being held in check by that dominant army in and of itself as well. So let's have a look and think about why that is. Obviously, it's worth stating, this meta came directly after a balanced data slate. And it's worth saying that it's always disappointing when we get a balanced data slate coupled with new releases that actually produces a less balanced game than the one previously. We had something of a rock, paper, scissors control meta last time out. There certainly were dominant factions, but I think we're looking at a much more substantial across the board level of dominance at the top of the game now. So if we look at our outliers and our dominant outliers in particular, there is one culprit above all others. It is the Necron tier. The Necrons are having an extremely powerful moment. They have a lot of event wins. They have extreme dominance in event placings. Their win rate is very, very healthy for an army that has a lot of variance across its player base in terms of things being tried and levels of ability out there in the game, and they are phenomenally strong. Why are they strong? Necrons are strong because Catan are an exceptionally powerful gatekeeper unit with -1 damage, lots of wounds, 4-up invuln, high toughness. Necrons are able to field an awful lot of these. That puts them in a very strong position, but the reality is the Necron rule set was already extremely wide and deep with a lot of options to call upon and a lot of good detachments. We're seeing success for Awakened Dynasty. We're seeing success for the new Pantheon of Woe. We're seeing success for Star Shatter Arsenal. Builds building around the Silent King and DDAs are doing well. Builds with a couple of Catan, build with lots of Catan, performing well. We're still seeing Warrior Spam and Wraith Brick lists performing well. The Necron book is an extremely powerful one. And essentially, the combination of Catan, and let's not forget the release of Amintar, an incredible fight first, sustains hit, feel no pain, force multiplying dynamo, who can, of course, be resurrected in Awakened Dynasty. That's an extremely powerful set of things to add into what was already arguably one of the best written codices of the edition. So Necrons having a phenomenal moment in a really, really powerful spot. Following them up are Space Marines. Ultramarines are also sitting pretty in a really nice spot at the moment. They boast phenomenal damage via their boosted +1 to wound oath. I think they have got an extremely large number of event wins over this time period and have done very well. And I think Space Marines have quite a varied player base, but we're still seeing massive success for the Ultramarines. And there's just an enormous range of ways to play things like Victrix, and we're seeing a lot of success for different types of lists here as well, either going heavier into the melee or building a lot more around things like Ballistas and Repexes. Ultramarines sit in a good spot because they have the output to lift what is a stat check meta. They have the means to play through that, and they have a lot of guile in the tricks and some of the better rule sets in the new releases, in particularly in Victrix and the Wardens of Ultramar, both really powerful data sheets with a lot going on for them, either through efficiency of wounds or damage and resilience. So I think Ultramarines definitely sitting in a really strong spot, and the player base for Space Marines is again massively wide and varied. When you look at these two factions, the two of essentially armies we often consider starter armies in Necrons and Ultramarines to both be in a really strong position means that they are very jacked on the rules and power front right now. Finishing up in third is the Astra Militarum. The Guard have won an awful lot of events. They boast an excellent win rate, and they have been very, very dominant at the top of the game. This is mostly through the new Grizzled Company detachment, which lets you put out an awful lot of damage with boosts. It was recently nerfed slightly, but it still has very, very good output. It boasts an Armor of Contempt, which is really, really effective on Guard units who can already boost their saves. So that gives you an awful lot of power and durability on the board. And crucially, Guard has the fallback of having a lot of OC. Of our contenders, Guard probably is the most OC rich, and that enables it to simply drown primary missions and beat the opponent on tempo and primary very readily by overwhelming them with sheer numbers and massed OC on the board. These three armies are all in a really, really strong position. I would say you can make the case that only Necrons is outwardly broken, but I'm always keeping an eye on armies that have a very, very high percentage win rate, like Guard and Ultramarines do, even in a context in which something like Necrons exists, suggests to me that those are still very, very powerful and are potential problems should only Necrons be dealt with in the upcoming slate. So those are our ones to beat, guys, at the top of the game right now. If we think about armies that are struggling, I'm afraid to report from my own elf biases, the Eldari are having a hard time. Now, this army is not by any means out of the running competitively. There are builds that can and do succeed. They have won one event during this period, but their win rate has plummeted. We're talking about like a 10+% drop in win rate for the Eldari since the balance changes, which is the worst drop of any of the factions directly impacted in that period. So that leaves the Eldari in a very difficult spot, and Eldari builds are simply not able to chew through the stat checks in front of them anymore. Given their identity as a glass cannon, if you can't do the damage to shift someone from a point, you are in trouble, and you have to get very creative and clever to win your games. There are plenty of specialists doing interesting things with Eldari, but their power has dropped off immeasurably. If we also have a look at outliers that are struggling, I think it's very much worth considering Orcs in that camp as well. Orcs have not enjoyed much by way of event success, and the Orc builds are really struggling in the face of Marine builds that can lift them, Guards builds that can lift them, and Necrons that can, unless the Orcs get exactly right, stat check and overwhelm them as well. So I think Orcs are, relative to their previous position where they were enjoying quite a sleeper position in the meta, are having a much, much harder time now and are definitely struggling to convert. Another outright struggler are the Grey Knights, who are really struggling to find an identity at the moment. They are very low in terms of representation, very low in terms of total games played compared to a lot of other armies, and they are simply not bringing home anything by way of event wins as well, with a poor win rate. Grey Knights are struggling because they have mobility, but not the output to actually lift things that simply sit in the mid-board and take up all the space. In the meta of stat checks, which is what we'll come to later, the Grey Knights are simply not able to get it done. They have ironically terrible matchups in some of our long-standing powerful forces in the meta, like Demons and Thousand Suns, and they are just simply not able to get things through. I think as well there is a player fatigue element with Grey Knights because the book itself was simply a bit of a dud in terms of how it was received and in terms of the amount of satisfaction it gave to Grey Knight players. There's not an awful lot of ways to do it. There's not an awful lot of interesting detachments. They feel like an army in desperate need of love. Probably more so than the other two, if I'm being honest. I think it wouldn't take much to restore Eldari and Orcs to prominence. The Grey Knights feel much more in need of substantive reworks, like we've previously seen for Tyranids and the Adeptus Mechanicus, and one can hope that we will see that in the near future. If we move it to think about some of our rising stars, there are a number of armies achieving interesting things in this meta. The Thousand Suns have crept back into prominence very aggressively in recent times. They've always enjoyed excellent game into slower stat check armies. I think Thousand Suns can give a very good game to Ultramarine stat check lists, to Necron stat check type lists. They have excellent play into anything that wants to put something in the middle and keep it alive and outscore you. Thousand Suns are a very real and present danger. So I think they're an interesting army to look at this moment in time for exactly that reason. They are still prone to being overrun. They definitely are techier and cuter than some of the armies on display here, but what they have is the power to answer stat checks, and simplistic game plans are often punished by the ability of the Thousand Suns to brutalize parts of the board. Another rising star is the goddamn Adeptus Custodes, specifically a build that involves all the Custodian Guard, a couple of Inquisitors, and 3 Land Raiders. This is a brutal stat check list. It's incredibly effective at overrunning particularly psychic damage armies, and it can absorb things like Thousand Suns, Scintillating Legion, Chaos Demons for that reason. And it has the basic stat check problem of the opponent has to try and kill 3 Land Raiders across mid-board, and after that they get clapped back by an entire army of Custodian Guard, who can hit exceptionally hard and then overwhelm the opponent. So this is a very simple and effective list. This isn't a particularly diverse roster, and actually a lot of our rising stars here are basically anchored to one build, but it's certainly effective in that sense. Another list worth pointing out, particularly in one Manchester with it recently, is the Death Watch. There's always been a running debate about the Death Watch. They are an uppy downy damage applying kind of army, but there are some really interesting Death Watch builds that can be particularly insufferable into certain aspects of the meta because they're applying Desolation Marines within their kill teams to give you an additional excellent indirect threat to pick the opponent off over the game and reduce their scoring as well. I think the Death Watch are highly specialized. I don't think this is a list that is dominating everything, but it gets through by dint of being specialized, able to focus damage, and able to play a slow game. Much like the Thousand Suns, this is a much more patient and interesting and slightly niche faction within the meta, but it's kept on succeeding, and now we are seeing some of the top players in the game genuinely picking up and using it. I think we can say firsthand there's a lot going for the Deathwatch build and its ability to delete the opponent over a period of turns, much like the Thousand Suns at this moment in time. If we think about armies that have fallen off, I think the most notable one is the Emperor's Children. Emperor's Children have had an exceptionally strong 6 to 9 months and have been in a really nice position basically since WTC last year. I think the issue for them now is that they simply can't handle stat checks. Large stat check armies don't hand out pledges well enough for Coterie to get into action, and they lack any real plan B. They took nerfs, they've got less stuff on the board, and they were already quite an elite army. And Demon Princes and Infractors and Noise Marines simply aren't cutting it into the biggest threats in the game right now, which means Emperor's Children can't play their tempo game. A lot of the squishy things they like to prey on have been driven out of the singles game by the stat checks in question, which also means they don't have their typical kind of counter role. Chaos Knights have dropped off significantly as well. I think in large part this is due to the fact that the Gatling Despoiler build, which was the main build for Chaos Knights, simply doesn't cut it into things like Catan, which makes Chaos Knights very sad. I am of the belief there's probably innovation and adaptation that can be made in Chaos Knights stylistically to get around these issues, but at the moment their results and their placings and their win rate has dropped off significantly, and considering how dominant they were in the months prior, that's definitely worthy of note. Another real falling star is the Adeptus Mechanicus. This was an army that was jacked and felt exceptionally powerful in the previous balance window, but has definitely dropped off considerably since. It boasts much worse numbers, it's struggling for event wins, and it doesn't seem to have a particularly good set of matchups into the wider field now, despite having access to oaths and a bunch of boosted data sheets. I am curious with the Adeptus Mechanicus if this is a short-term thing, and it might just be that the tip-top of the game makes them look a bit pedestrian at this point. But we've got new models and releases coming for the Adeptus Mechanicus very soon, so my money is on them making a bounce back in the near future. The basic chassis of rules they now have access to is still really good, and they still play very fundamental Warhammer. I think of these three, Emperor's Children is the most niche and needs the most work to revive. The other two both boast quite considerable toolkits and excellent ways to play missions in 40k, and I think actually it shouldn't take too much to see those resurgent in the near future. If we're thinking about what our meta archetype is, then I am obliged to report that at this exact moment in time, we are looking at something of a stat check meta. Catan are a stat check. Necron Warriors are a stat check. Victrix Guard and Redemptor Dreadnoughts are a stat check. There are various interesting builds poking in and around these things and applying damage to try and solve the problems, but the overwhelming majority of the lists we're seeing out in singles are shoving with brute force, and having quite a lot of success doing so. So in order to go deep in events, you either need to be bringing one of these kinds of stat checks, or you need to have a very clear, pronounced, and effective answer to it. So in short, the damage question is defining the top of the singles game right now. Can you answer the damage? If you can, you're in a good spot. If you can't, you're in a bad spot. It's exceptionally variable and binary for different factions depending on the circumstances in which they find themselves. My hope is that this can be fixed relatively straightforwardly. We have new releases coming in the CSM in particular, who are famously stat check killers when they're at their best. So hopefully the CSM will add some variety and be able to lift some of these things. I think in the long term, we're going to need to see a few adjustments to the armies that simply have too much stuff on the board and are able to make it too durable. And it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this without essentially bringing back the same meta over again that had been in existence previously. There's definitely adjustments that need making, but I'm optimistic that it won't take particularly substantive fixes to get this back underway. And the Necron Menace is certainly looking like our single biggest concern in singles at this moment in time. More on that as it develops. As we've seen from results around the world, it's not that other armies can't win events. There are plenty of event wins going to other places. They are just concentrated in a few hands in ways they perhaps shouldn't be. And it's going to be a case of trying to make some adjustments in the near future in as canny a fashion as possible. That is it for us, guys. Thank you very much for watching this meta report. I will be endeavoring to keep these going over the next coming months and keeping you up to date. We massively appreciate you at 6 Plus. Please do hit like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. If you want to sign up as a YouTube member and get additional content there, potentially unlock coaching in our coaching Discord, we'd be happy to have you. Just drop us a message in our Discord. All the links in the description below, and you can sign up as a member on YouTube. Yeah, we love you all very much. I'll be back again very soon. Lowest of Men, out.